Now there are two types of vows that the Torah discusses. The first is called a neder, and the second is called a shavua. The Gemara explains the difference between a neder and a shavua is that the neder affects a change in the object, and the shavua affects a change on the person. In other words, when a person makes a neder, what he is saying is that this object, which until now was a perfectly permitted object, will be as if it was sanctified. Let's say a person takes an object and in fact sanctifies it, donates it to the Beis HaMikdash, then it's holy, can't be used for a mundane purpose. So a neder is a statement, Davar zeh asur alai kikarban. This thing is forbidden to me as if it was a sacrifice. No, it isn't a sacrifice. You don't give it to the temple, you don't offer it as a sacrifice in the temple. But for the purpose of making the prohibition, you are declaring this thing is as forbidden to me as a sacrifice. That's called a neder. So that's one type of prohibition. It affects the status of the object. The object becomes a forbidden object, in the same way that a genuine sacrifice cannot be eaten or used inappropriately. This item has the same legal status. This thing, to me, is as if it's a sacrifice, but only to me, by the way, not to anybody else. It's something which is very, very personal. Davar zeh asur alai. This thing is forbidden to me as a sacrifice. You can eat it. I can't eat it. The second type of vow is a shavua. A shavua is a declaration that I will not engage in an activity. I will not eat cake. I will not go to such and such place, etc. The prohibition rests upon the person. It rests upon the person. And this distinction between a neder and a shavua has legal consequences. Without going into details, as a rule, once something is prohibited, you can't prohibit it a second time. But the halacha is that once a thing was prohibited with a neder, you can then subsequently prohibit it with a shavua. Because here it isn't the same prohibition being superimposed on the same prohibition. The first prohibition of neder really affects the object. The second prohibition of shavua affects the person. And therefore it isn't considered a double imposition. That's a legal technicality. But these are the two types of vows that we're talking about, yes?
Can you give an example of that?
Of a shavua?
No, of a double.
For example, let's say I have a piece of cake here. First I say, this piece of cake should be forbidden to me as a sacrifice. And then I say, I swear I will not eat this piece of cake. So there, both prohibitions take effect. Why? Because it isn't a question of a double prohibition. It isn't as if I said twice, I swear not to eat the cake. The first prohibition rests on the object, the second prohibition rests on the person. But this is the idea of a neder and a shavua. And the Torah begins and says the following, that if a person makes one of these prohibitions, lo yachel b'voro, he is obligated, he is forbidden, I should say, to profane his word. Rather, kechol hayot mipiv ya'aseh, the person should do exactly as he says. This is a binding obligation. He has to keep his word, and this is what the Torah tells us on this subject. Now the question is that why does the Torah create this mechanism for making personal prohibitions? I mean, is it something desirable? Is it a good idea? Why don't we say, listen, it's enough that which the Torah prohibits? We have 613 mitzvahs. Among the 613 mitzvahs, we have 365 prohibitions. So there are plenty of things which the Torah forbids. Why do we need a mechanism by which we can expand the Torah and make new prohibitions? Doesn't seem to be necessary. But why should we want to create greater hardship for ourselves? That's one question. Another question, going back to the parsha, is that this parsha is introduced in a very unusual way. Generally, if you look through the Chumash, most legal sections of the Torah begin with the formula, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, that God said it to Moshe, and Moshe was in turn commanded to transmit this to the Jewish people. But what the Torah records is God having given it to Moshe. Here, the Torah skips that step, and it says, Vayidaber Moshe el Roshei HaMatos, that Moshe gave this law to the heads of the tribes. So the Torah skips over the fact that it was given by God to Moshe, and records Moshe is giving this over to the heads of the tribes. That's noteworthy. As of all the parshios in the Torah, why is it that this one is not described as having been given by God to Moshe? Rather, it's Moshe giving it over to the heads of the tribes. And why to the heads of the tribes? You know, the Talmud tells us that there was an order in which Moshe Rabbeinu taught the Torah generally. First, he taught it to his brother Aaron. Then he taught it to Aaron's sons. Then he taught it to the Zikanim, to the members of the Supreme Court. Whereas here, we have something unusual, that Moshe Rabbeinu teaches it to the heads of the tribes, the princes of the 12 tribes. This is unusual. This is a departure from the normal order. Why would that be? Chazal hint to this question, pointing out that the reason it's given to the Roshei HaMatos is to teach us an important rule about vows, that vows can be annulled by authorities. As we know that before Rosh Hashanah, we have Hataras Nedarim, we convene a court of three, and this court has the power to annul vows. So this is derived from the fact that Moshe gave this law to the heads of the tribes, showing that there is an authority that can annul vows. So perhaps Chazal were bothered by this question, why the parsha is directed to the heads of tribes. Perhaps we'll offer another suggestion. I think that the idea will become a little bit clearer if we ask one last question. But why is this section placed exactly where it is at the end of Sefer BaMidbar? As we know that immediately following this, Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded by God to perform his last official act. God tells Moshe to take revenge from the people of Midian. If you remember that Parshas Balak, the people of Midian tempted the Jewish people, caused their daughters to seduce the Jewish men, which brought a great calamity. And God now commands Moshe Rabbeinu to avenge the honor of the Jewish people. And he says, Achar, and after that, Te'asef alamecha, you shall die. Rashi makes the point that it was very praiseworthy on the part of Moshe Rabbeinu that Moshe Rabbeinu actually pursued this act, because God told him that this is going to be your last act, that shortly after this you will die. So you think Moshe Rabbeinu would have delayed. It reminds me of my uncle, Zichron Libracha, used to tell a joke that there was a fellow on death row. So on death row, they give you your last wish for a meal. Whatever you want. I figure it's your last chance to enjoy. So there was a man on death row, so they ask him, what do you want for your last meal? So he says, I want fresh strawberries and cream. So they tell him, strawberries are out of season. So he says, I'm not in any rush. I can wait. So, Moshe Rabbeinu could have waited too. God tells him, listen, you perform this last act, and then you're going to die. So Moshe Rabbeinu could have said, okay, I'm not in any rush. Not in any rush to die, not in any rush to perform this act. But Moshe Rabbeinu, because he was commanded by God to do this, he did it with great zrizus, great diligence, even though it hastened his own death. So really, that is his last act. So if that war is his last act, this parsha is in a sense the next to the last act. This is the last instruction that Moshe Rabbeinu gave, the last teaching of Moshe Rabbeinu before the preparation for his death. Of course, the book of Devarim is really the last act. This is Moshe Rabbeinu reviewing the Torah before his death. But the last new legislation that Moshe Rabbeinu seems to give is this law of vows. So the question is, why is this like the last thing? It almost gives us the impression that this is really not so relevant to Moshe during his own lifetime. It's almost as if this parsha, its significance is really going to be something which will follow Moshe Rabbeinu, and therefore he only teaches it at the very end. So what sense does that make? It would seem that the laws of vows should be just as relevant during Moshe's lifetime as afterward. So why is it that this is the last new law that Moshe Rabbeinu teaches? I think we have to understand it in the following way. We tend to divide all activities into three categories. There are things that we must do, and we call those mitzvahs. There are things that we must not do, and we call those averos. And then there's everything in the middle, which is optional, voluntary. If you want, do it. You don't want, don't do it. Okay? So, if you think about it for a moment, you realize that there are hundreds of thousands of different things that you can do in life. Then you come to the interesting conclusion that that middle category is the largest of the three. Because we have 248 positive commands at the one extreme. You have 365 negative commands at the other extreme. And in the middle you have hundreds of thousands of different things. You want to eat apples? Eat apples. You don't want to eat apples? Don't eat apples. You want to wear shoes with laces? Then wear shoes with laces. You want to wear slip-on shoes? Wear slip-on shoes. It's all optional. There's no law, there's no obligation, there's no religious issue at all. So really, that area in between, the area where everything is optional, really is the broadest category. There are very few things relatively that are obligatory and very few things relatively that are prohibited. Everything in the middle, this is the largest category. The Sefer Chayvus Alavavas tells us that it's an oversimplification. This is not so simple at all. In reality, for every Jew, there are really only two categories. There are things that he must do, and there are things that he must not do. Meaning, everything in life has the potential to bring us closer to God or to distance us from God. If a given act will bring us closer, we must do it. If a given act will estrange us from God, we must not do it. And there's nothing which is neutral. Because the reality is, whatever it is, it has the potential to bring you closer or to distance you. The question is, what should I eat? Should I eat vanilla or should I eat chocolate? Well, there's a psychological component to eating as well. I mean, you eat something that is very tasty, it can put you into a good mood, and perhaps the next thing you do after that, the Torah that you study, the act of kindness you perform, will be enhanced because you're in a better mood having eaten something tasty. On the other hand, maybe you eat this thing which is very tasty, it's an act of self-indulgence, maybe it'll corrupt you in some way, it'll become a habit, and therefore, in terms of developing self-discipline, maybe you should eat the flavor that you specifically don't want. So these decisions are important. I don't want to say you should agonize over them, because that also is a terrible thing. You're faced with this question, you agonize, should I eat it, should I not eat it? But by that time it'll melt, it'll be all over the floor, and that's also something you have to consider. Who's going to mop it up? But the point is that, contrary to what we imagine, these areas in between have a religious and moral dimension. It isn't just that, as long as I've avoided a technical violation of one of the 365 negative commandments, as long as I've been careful to fulfill the 248 positive commandments, I'm okay. Now, the areas which in Hebrew are called divrei rishus are also very, very important. Now, that doesn't mean to say that this middle category doesn't exist. It exists, but let me explain what it is. The mitzvahs of the Torah are given to the entire nation. Here, there is no room for individual differences. In other words, there's a mitzvah of Birkat HaMazon. Every Jew has to say Birkat HaMazon. There is a prohibition of eating pork. Every Jew must desist from eating pork. Here, it's not a question of my nature and my temperament and my situation. And the mitzvahs of the Torah are categorical. They are given to groups. Sometimes there are differences in categories. There are certain mitzvahs that are obligatory on only men, certain other mitzvahs only on women, and so on and so forth. But as a rule, the Torah speaks to broad categories. It doesn't speak to individuals. In this middle area, it is very, very, very personal and very, very individualized. That's why it's a separate category. In other words, here, it could be that the same act for me will be a mitzvah, and for you will be an aveira, or vice versa. Get it?
No.
No?
Just give one.
One example?
Yeah, please.
Let's say, for example, should I go to the country to celebrate the beauty of nature? For some people, this may be a sublime religious experience. If temperamentally you enjoy nature, you like nature, you appreciate nature, then this might be something that will enhance your avodas Hashem. If you are not the type that enjoys nature, so your recollection of your outing in the country will be of the ants and the bees and the traffic on the 400 coming back. You'll come back more aggravated than you went, then probably it's not a good idea for you to go. Okay? The point is that even in the religious and spiritual dimension, it's not the same for every person. So the cheshbonos, the calculations that go into the question of whether I should do it or not, or whether you should do it or not, are very, very different. Okay? And that's why it's a separate category. Or the laws of the Torah, the mitzvahs of the Torah, that which the Torah obligates us to do, that which the Torah forbids us to do, here there's no room for personal decision making. It's not like I ask myself, will not eating pork add meaning to my life or value to my life? It's not a question for any Jew to ask. The Torah says don't do it, you don't do it. It's a question of saying the Birkat HaMazon or giving tzedakah or doing some other mitzvah. It's not a question, what will this do for me? Maybe I'm a unique person. Maybe my circumstances are different. It's irrelevant. Those aren't questions for you to ask. This is a mitzvah which is given to the category of all Jews or the particular group of Jews to which you belong. So of course you have to do it. But in that middle area, it is a separate category, but not in the sense that anything is neutral. It's a different category in the sense that here the decisions are very, very individual. Very, very individual. And when we talk about it being individual, it's because every person is different in personality and temperament, and also because we believe that every person comes to this world for a different purpose. Every person has a unique mission. And engaging in a certain activity may bring me closer to the fulfillment of my mission, or it may distance me from the fulfillment of my mission. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have two people. One of the people, on the basis of his temperament and personality and his background, etc., his life is geared to the doing of kindnesses. This is the type of person who has a heart of gold. He'll help anybody. He'll give the shirt off his back to someone. He's very active in raising money for tzedakah, for distributing money for tzedakah, for finding people in need, for giving advice. That's the way he is. He's a person whose life is to help people in their needs. Then you have another person who's an intellectual. In other words, he thinks in a certain way. He's blessed with a very sharp, incisive mind to deal with philosophical problems, to create clarity where there previously is only a cloud of nebulous confusion. And this is a person who can really make the world a better place, and that he can clarify exactly what it is we're meant to believe and what we're meant to value, and so on and so forth. But you have to have a certain amount of self-awareness. You have to know what my purpose is, what my role is, what my talents are, what my experiences have led me to do. And on that basis, you make decisions as to what I should do, what I shouldn't do, what will I be good at, what will I be effective at, and so on and so forth. And this is very, very, very personal and very, very individual. It's a very interesting thing that the Mesilas Yesharim, classic ethical work, begins with the following line. It says, Yesod HaChasidus, the foundation of piety, V'shorish Avodah HaTmima, the root of perfect service of God, who she is barer v'yisamais etzel ha'adam. It should be clarified and established as true to the individual. Ma chovaso ba'olamo. What is his obligation in his world? Now, this is a sentence which has been examined from every angle, every word, every subtle nuance has been analyzed. And it is said that the Vilna Gaon was a big fan of this Sefer Mesilas Yesharim, and he said that in the first 11 chapters, there isn't an extra word. Meaning it was written with tremendous precision. But one of the points that is made, there's a very unusual expression here, that the person has to clarify ma chovaso ba'olamo. What is his obligation in his world? What does it mean? His obligation in his world, or her obligation in her world. I mean, his obligation in the world, or her obligation in the world. What does it mean? Chovaso ba'olamo, his obligation in his world. Very funny expression. Ma chovaso ba'olam. What is his obligation in the world, not in his world? And the answer is because, in a real sense, each of us lives in his own world. My world is not the same as your world. The issues, the concerns, the challenges, the opportunities of my world are not the same as your world. And therefore, you have to discern what is your obligation in your world. And by the way, this is not just a cute verbal, so to speak. It must be what the Mesilas Yesharim means. Because at first glance, why is it necessary to clarify what our obligation is? We know what our obligation is. We have the Torah. We have 613 mitzvahs. Everyone knows what our obligation is. And what does he say? That the first thing, the foundation of piety is you have to establish what your obligation is in your world. What do you mean clarify what your obligation is? We know what our obligation is. We have a chumash, we have a mitzvahs, we have a shulchan aruch. We know what our obligation is. The answer is because the 613 mitzvahs in the shulchan aruch, this is everybody's obligation. And that's obviously the starting point. But if you want to reach true piety, true chasidus, that means going beyond the minimum requirement. Now you have to clarify what is your obligation in your world. For that, you can't refer to the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't tell you what your obligation is. The Shulchan Aruch tells you what everybody's obligation is. But what is your unique obligation in that middle category, in the realm of voluntary activity? This you have to clarify. Now, obviously, the Torah is going to be a guide to that. Because we're not telling you that you should figure this out by contemplating and meditating on the inside of your head. Obviously, the Torah is going to be a guide and an inspiration in this process, but this is not something which is explicitly written. There's no chapter and verse which tells you this is what you must do. And that's why it's not so easy. It's easier said than done. But that is the starting point. Obviously, you're not going to know how to achieve your purpose in life until you determine what your purpose in life and what your mission is. Once you make that determination, then within that realm which by Torah law is voluntary, there are going to be things that you must do and things that you must not do. For example, once you determine that your mission in life is X, you must pursue the training to qualify you to do X. So if you see that your mission in life is to be a doctor, then you must go to medical school. If you see that your mission in life is to be a lawyer, you must go to law school. If you see your mission in life is to be a rabbi, you must go to rabbinical school. But you must. Because once you decide that this is your purpose in life, then you are obligated to pursue it. This is chalvaso ba'olamo. This is your obligation in your world. And there was not a question, should I, shouldn't I? If this is your obligation, if this is your purpose, this is your raison d'etre, you must do it. You have to do it. And not only must you do it, but you must avoid anything and everything that will distract you from your goal. I stumbled across a very little book whose name eludes me now. But the author of this book said an amazing thing. That people think that the reason successful people are successful is because they never quit. You ever hear that? They never quit. They always keep going. The reality is the opposite. Successful people are successful because they frequently quit. They quit doing the things that distract them from their goals. So, for example, if your goal is to become a Torah scholar, and you find yourself spending an inordinate amount of time surfing the net, you have to quit. Because if you don't quit, it's going to compromise your ability to achieve your goal. And therefore, truly successful people are always quitting. They're constantly quitting. They're quitting the things that take them away from the pursuit and achievement of their goal. It's an amazing thing. You think about it for a second. Right? A person who never quits is a person who finds himself going into 10 different directions all over the place. Because he never quits. Once something catches his fancy, he pursues it relentlessly, but he's not going to achieve what his real purpose in life is. So the successful person is quitting. He might be distracted for a moment, then he says, no, this is a waste of time. Forget it. I quit. I'm going to pursue what my real goal is. That takes resolve. It takes willpower. So the Torah created a mechanism by which a person can legislate for himself. Now we all know that. The things that the Torah forbids, we wouldn't dream of doing. Nah. You know, I know sometimes we're tempted there too. But a person who really is committed to the system, eating chazir, eat pork is not a challenge at all. I'm not going to eat pork. The Torah says you can't do that. But in the area of voluntary activity, there may be all sorts of things I'm tempted to do that distract me from my goals. I should be studying today for my big exam, but I'm really tempted. It's beautiful weather outside. I'm tempted to go to the beach and have a great time. And what will happen to my test? We'll worry about it later. As the saying goes, Daya l'tzara b'shait. I'll worry about the problem when it comes up. So, that's not good. So we need a mechanism by which a person can legislate for himself that the rules, the guidelines, the priorities that he has to set for himself as an individual will have the power of Torah law to obligate and to forbid. So the Torah created a mechanism called neder and shvuah. Neder is always a prohibition. A shvuah can be both. A shvuah can be a commitment to do something or a commitment not to do something. But these are very powerful techniques by which a person can, in a sense, direct himself and say, this is what I must do. I'm going to guarantee that I do it. How so? I will swear to do it. I will swear not to do anything that will prevent me from doing it. If it's a particular thing which is a very serious distraction, I can forbid it to myself as if it was a sacrifice. These are very powerful tools for, in a sense, customizing my avodas Hashem, customizing my service of God. And that's what the Torah gave us this mechanism. The Torah gave us this mechanism because avodas Hashem and Torah is not one size fits all. If it was one size fits all, if we were all meant to serve God in the same way, we wouldn't need Nidar, we wouldn't need Shavuos. We would just have the 613 mitzvahs, yes?
I'm sorry, I thought we're not allowed to make vows and then we have this...
No, God forbid. Who told you you're not allowed to make vows?
I don't know.
No, it's a mistake. Not only are you not allowed to make vows, the Rambam holds that where necessary, it's a mitzvah saseh, it's a positive command to make vows. Jews are reticent when it comes to making vows because the Talmud tells us that if a person, God forbid, makes a false vow, the punishment is so severe, so therefore Jews are reluctant to make vows because maybe inadvertently they'll make a vow which is false.
So everybody's going around saying bli neder all the time, so I don't understand.
That's right, because they're very, very scared of the possibility of violation. But in theory, these are tools which are very, very powerful tools.
Guess I'm showing my ignorance.
No. You're 100% right. Most people are very careful. Bli neder, no commitment. But the point is that the flip side of that is that yes, you've avoided violation, but you've also avoided commitment.
Okay, so if you say to somebody, I'm going to meet you at Young and Steele's at 2 o'clock.
Okay,
you don't show up.
That is a very interesting question. The truth is this. The truth is, for a neder or for a shvuah to be binding, it has to be expressed in a very, very specific way.
Okay.
Now, the rule of thumb is this. If a person makes a promise which involves a mitzvah, so then it's considered a binding vow, even if you don't explicitly use the words neder or shvuah. It isn't necessary to say the neder. If you tell someone that if you bring me the newspaper, I'll be very grateful. And he brings you the newspaper and you're not grateful, you have not violated a vow in that instance. It has to be something related to a mitzvah. But if you express the words, I swear, for example, shabuah, then it's obligating, binding, even if it isn't involved with the mitzvah. So there are laws that govern this, and the person has to be careful. But the point is that the neder and the shvuah, we want to avoid them because we're scared of violating, but the reality is we have to know at the same time that, why did God create these categories of neder and shvuah? I mean, just that we should have to say bli neder all the time? Because God could just as well not have invented the idea of neder and shvuah and then we get off the hook. Right? The answer is because these are very, very valuable and powerful tools, as we said, for customizing a person's avodas Hashem. Now, when does this become relevant? When do these tools become important? And for whom are these tools important? And then we can offer the conjecture as follows. That, our lives are all different. But our lives are different because our experiences are different, our backgrounds are different, the places we live are different, and so on and so forth. When the Jews were living in the Midbar, when they were living in the desert, as one big happy family, under the Ananei Kavod, under the clouds of divine glory, it could be conjectured that this was a shared experience. People were eating the same things. Everyone was eating mon. They were drinking the same things, drinking the miraculous water of the Be'er. They lived in similar housing, clouds of glory. They did not engage in professions because there was no need for that. What did they do all day? They studied, they meditated under the direction of Moshe Rabbeinu. It was essentially they're all doing the same things. There was not that much variation in life. I mean, there probably was some variation, but not that much variation. When is that going to change? Like, at what point in history did this really become different? I think we could conjecture that with the death of Moshe Rabbeinu and the entry into Eretz Yisrael, this is where the shared common experience is going to end. This is where people are going to be living in different places, they're going to be eating different foods, they're going to be engaged in different occupations, and so on and so forth. And therefore, it is at that point that the customization of Avodas Hashem becomes a more critical issue. And therefore, when does Moshe Rabbeinu transmit this law to the people? This is his last teaching. This is the last law that he transmits before his death. As long as he's alive and the Jews are living in the Midbar, this is not as important. But the Jews are about to go into Eretz Yisrael, and it's going to be very, very, very different. Now, if this seems a little abstract, I'll just bring it a little bit down to earth with a very down-to-earth mashal. Imagine a yeshiva. And you have the students in the yeshiva. And as long as the students are in the yeshiva, right? Alex will confirm this. As long as you're in the yeshiva, everyone's doing pretty much the same thing. Right? You're going to the same classes, same schedule, eating the same food. If the yeshiva provides meals, same curriculum. So obviously there are differences. Some people find certain things more interesting, other things less interesting, but it's very much a shared experience. Then you graduate. What happens at graduation? Everyone goes his own way. So this person will go to that yeshiva, this person will go to that school, and this person will pursue this career, this person will pursue that career. And all of a sudden, when they get together for their 10th reunion, you see everybody's life is different. Totally different. Because when the shared common experience ends, this is where everyone's life becomes very, very much individualized. And it's an amazing thing how you see that people that were once upon a time classmates and really very, very similar in terms of their experiences now have diversified into totally different areas. And their lives have taken on qualities which are totally unique. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu understood. And therefore, the last teaching of Moshe Rabbeinu, the last teaching before his last official act, which is the last act before his death, right, is this teaching of the Parsha of Nedarim. Because this is really the method, the techniques for the customization of a person's Avodas Hashem. Now, the reason he transmits this specifically to the Roshei HaMatos is now also relevant. This is a subject which runs through the entire book of BaMidbar, which is the idea of the tribal divisions, the division of the Jewish people into 12 tribes. What is the idea behind this? Rav Hirsch writes a very interesting thing. The word mata means a staff. But Rav Hirsch shows from other places in Tanakh that it really means a branch. It means a branch of a tree. Now, probably it's related, because what do you make a staff out of? You take a branch off a tree and you carve it into a staff. So a mata, by extension, becomes a staff. But it first shows that the fundamental meaning is the branch of a tree. The Jewish people, the Jewish nation, is a tree. But it isn't like a palm tree, which has a single trunk. In other words, it's more like the maple tree, which has branches which spread, and the larger branches become smaller branches, and so on and so forth. So there are 12 fundamental branches. The branches are different. They have a common trunk, because they all come from a common heritage, and they all have a common source of inspiration, which is the Torah, but they diversify. And we know that each shevet has a way of life, and an ideal, and a lifestyle, and its own mission. We've talked about this in the past when we discussed in Parshas Naso the offerings of the Nesiim, the princes, the amazing thing, which is that the Torah tells us that each of the princes of the tribes brought a sacrifice which was exactly identical for each of the tribes. And the question is that why does the Torah repeat it 12 times, again and again and again and again and again? The Torah should have just said, this is the sacrifice, each of the princes brought the same sacrifice. So the Ramban says it wasn't the same sacrifice. It was a different sacrifice, because each tribe brought that sacrifice with a different kavanah, with a different understanding, an understanding that was associated with the unique qualities of that shevet, which, by the way, is a fantastic thing when you think about it. Which means that your individualism does not have to express itself in some outlandish departure from the norm. You can do the exact same thing as everyone else is doing, and yet it is a very, very individualized form of Avodas Hashem, in as much that you bring a different understanding and a different kavanah, a different intent to it. I believe I mentioned, I don't know if it was this year or past years, something I once heard, that they interviewed a certain psychologist and asked him that what is the temptation of people to pierce their bodies and get tattoos. And the psychiatrist answered that because basically we're all the same. I don't know, anyone can say that, because to me, you look around the room and see everyone looks different. But people generally are the same body parts, etc. And everyone seeks to assert his own individuality. So therefore you figure, if I get a tattoo, that'll make me different. If I pierce my body with some object, that'll make me different. And people want to do that. Now the Torah forbids that. Tattoos the Torah explicitly forbids. But I have to tell you the truth, that even piercing the body, it seems to me that the Torah does not endorse this. Because we know that there's a parish in the Torah of the Eved Ivri, that when the Eved Ivri signs up for an extended term of duty, the Torah says, what happens? The master pierces his ear with an awl, and he becomes a slave until Yovel. And Rashi brings the statement of Chazal, that what is the symbolism of the ear being pierced? Because this ear should have recalled what it hurt. At Har Sinai we were told, Ki li b'nei Yisrael avodim, we are meant to be servants to God, not servants to other men. And this person voluntarily signs himself up to be a servant to another human master, so therefore there's something defective in the ear, so the ear is marked with a hole. So, I don't know. I think that piercing ears has become an accepted thing in our society. I don't know exactly. Yeah, my kids all have their ears pierced. I don't know. Yes?
But don't we have Rachel? He's bringing nose rings to Rachel?
Doesn't say they pierced necessarily. You can have clip-ons, right?
But there was also the idea in the Midbar that they tore the gold out of their...
I think to the contrary. The contrary. It says they pulled them off. Okay? If they were pierced, I don't think you can pull the earring off without pulling the ear off. Right?
So these were all things that were
I don't know.
pressures, held by
I don't
pressure,
know.
not by...
I don't know. I just know that when my oldest girls were very, very little, they wanted to get their ears pierced. And my third child was a boy. Now he's 20 years old, but then was a little boy. And because he only had sisters, there was a little bit of gender confusion. He wanted to do what they were doing. So they were getting their ears pierced. He wanted his ear pierced. So I tried to explain to him. He says, "No, Yaakov," he says, boys don't do that. Okay. But in any case, he was coming along to the trip. So the girls are getting their ears pierced in some wall. And while they're there, some father comes up with his son. And the boy gets his ear pierced. Took a lot of explanation. But fortunately, we got over it. 20 years later, he's all right. Anyway. But the point is this. The point is that we don't have to do those types of things. We don't have to tattoo ourselves or pierce ourselves in order to assert our individuality. In other words, it could be we're doing the same mitzvah, but each person brings a different understanding, a different passion, a different fervor, and it becomes something which is very, very personal and very, very individual. But each shevet has its own way. Each shevet has its own style. And that's why the carbon of the nasi, it might be externally the same sacrifice, but it really is something which is totally unique. And that's why this mitzvah is given to the Rashi Hamatos. It's given to the Rashi Hamatos. It's given to the heads of the tribes. Because the fundamental division, this is where the splitting begins. This is where the separation begins with the heads of each shevet. And therefore, that's why the mitzvah is given specifically to them, as we said, a departure from the normal order of transmission of the law. It may also be, and this is something that maybe is a little bit of a conjecture, that the reason the Torah begins with Moshe giving this to the Rashi Hamatos, and not with God giving it to Moshe, is because this particular law of Nedarim was not relevant to Moshe himself. I don't understand what that would be. One interesting thing we know about Moshe, we learn, as a matter of fact, from this week's parsha. It says that God told Moshe to wage war against Midian, a war of vengeance against Midian. Now we know that Midian really was not the instigator. The nation that really started up with the Jews was Moab. Midian only came to assist. And strangely, although God commanded Moshe to fight Midian, he commanded Moshe not to fight against Moab. We're going to learn in Parshas Dvarim, in next week's Parsha, that God said, "Al tatzares Moab, but this is Muhammad. Don't wage war against Moab." And this is something very, very peculiar, right? And the Gemara explains the reason for it is because God had plans for Moab. There was a great descendant that emerged from Moab, Rus, and God didn't want that the nation of Moab be attacked or have its people killed, placing her birth at risk. And therefore, there's a special exception that was made over here. Now, the Gemara in Bava Kama says the following: that when God told Moshe Rabbeinu, "Don't wage war against Moab," whatever God's intention was, why was it necessary for God to tell Moshe not to wage war against Moab? He says, do you think Moshe Rabbeinu would have waged war on his own? Would he have waged war on his own? Like God had to tell him, don't wage war? God would have said nothing. He wouldn't have waged war. So the Gemara answers, because Moshe Rabbeinu would have made a kal v'chaymer, would have made a logical inference, that if I was commanded to wage war against Midian, who only were the assistants, certainly I should wage war against Moab. That's what God had to tell him. But if not for that, it wouldn't have been necessary for God to tell Moshe Rabbeinu to wage war against Moab, because Moshe would not have done it on his own. So the question is, why not? Because we know that there is a concept in the Torah of Mochemes Rishus. There is a concept of optional war. So perhaps Moshe Rabbeinu would have contemplated waging war against Moab, even in the absence of a divine command. The truth is this. The truth is that there is something which is very, very unique about Moshe Rabbeinu. The Rambam tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu was in a state of constant connection to God. That's why he had to separate himself from his wife and so on and so forth. He was in a constant state of connection to God. And therefore we could conjecture that Moshe Rabbeinu at any given moment knew exactly what God wanted of him, without God having to say it. There was an intuition, there was a sense. He could feel it in his bones, because of that connection, what exactly God would want of him. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu would not have waged war unless he would have had this intuition that God wants him to wage war. So the question is, if God didn't want there to be war, then Moshe wouldn't have had the intuition, he would have done it anyway. So the Gemara says, no, he would have made a mistake, would have made a logical inference from the command to wage war against Midian, that's why he had to be told. But Moshe Rabbeinu is very different than the rest of us. Everyone else in the world, in that gray area in between the mitzvahs and the averos, that area of optional activity, we don't have the intuition. We are groping. We're figuring out. Moshe Rabbeinu had a sense. He knew exactly, even in that area, what God wanted of him. He wouldn't have needed the Nadarim to strengthen his resolve. Because to Moshe Rabbeinu, his understanding of God's desires for him would have been so strong that it would be the equivalent of an explicit command. He could have lived without having this special rule of Nadarim and Shvuas to strengthen his resolve to do what he had to do. And therefore this mitzvah really only becomes relevant for the people that Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to. And therefore the Torah doesn't record it as God giving it to Moshe. That would imply that there's relevance to Moshe himself. It only records it as Moshe giving it to the Rosh Hamatos, because that is the point at which it becomes relevant. Okay, so this is the discussion of the parsha. But the point I want to make, I think that is something we all have to think about, is the idea that sometimes I think we are very complacent. We think that as long as we are in compliance with the 613 mitzvahs in the Shulchan Aruch, we are okay. No, halavai. We should only be in compliance. But the reality is that there's something more than that. There's something more than that, which is the individual's role in the divine scheme. Because what does God want for me? What is my purpose? What is my mission? And even as has been pointed out, we might not want to take advantage of this technique of Nadarim and Shavuos, because maybe the risk of violation is too great, and we don't want, God forbid, to stumble in the sin of Nadarim and Shavuos. But it doesn't exempt us from the idea which underlies the parsha, which is that Avodas Hashem is something which is very, very individual. I think there are certain junctures in life where we do think about these things seriously. We perhaps should think about them more often. But I think there are times we do. I think that in the process of making decisions for ourselves regarding education, I think we think about that. When a young person is finishing high school and thinking of the next step, I think that that's an example of a time where a person does think, what is my purpose in life? What do I want to achieve? What do I want to accomplish? I think when a person contemplates marriage, I think it's also one of those rare occasions that a person really spends some time thinking seriously about himself, herself, goals, objectives, purpose. What do I want to achieve? Is this person an appropriate partner for that? Because as I said, that if we would give more frequent thought to those ideas, we would quit more. Quit what? Quit doing the things that distract us from our purpose. we'd be more focused, more directed, we'd be more inspired to work towards those goals. And instead, because we don't think about them, so we tell ourselves, listen, I go to shul, and I keep kosher, and I keep Shabbos, I'm okay. Which again, is a very, very good thing. Don't anybody leave here thinking that, I was dismissing, mitzvah observance. To the contrary, that's the starting point. But think about what my purpose in life, what my goal should be, what I can achieve, how can I make the world a better place in a way that no one else can? What is my unique contribution? That, I think, is something that all of us think about from time to time, more often than once in a decade. And if we think about that and really take it seriously, I think there's a greater likelihood of our being able to achieve those objectives in our lifetime. Okay, thank you for listening. Bez Hashem, next week, same time.